Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, another Islamic schools raided and hundreds of abused captives freed in Nigeria. It's the third such operation on an Islamic institution in the north of the country in less than a month. We have our correspondent in Lagos. Also, fresh rioting breaks out in Conakry just days after fatal clashes in the city leave at least 7 dead. The unrest broke out during opposition protests against plans for constitutional reform. And Uber's plans to offer boats to customers in Lagos seem to hold water. The ride-sharing companies hoping to navigate around the Nigerian city's notorious traffic jams. But first, in the third such operation in a month, police in Nigeria say that they have rescued abused captives from an Islamic school in the north of Nigeria. About 500 men and boys have reportedly been freed from the institution in Katsina. Not all had been mistreated, but police sources say that about 200 showed signs of having been abused. Many are believed to have been chained to walls, molested and beaten. Now, this just comes days after dozens of people were freed during a police raid on a similar Islamic facility just on Monday evening. President Muhammadu Buhari has vowed a crackdown on abuse in Islamic institutions. Chinye Osundu tells us more.
In Nigeria, we have about 10.5 million children, according to the UNICEF, that is out of school. And so that high level of illiteracy actually encourages the situation. And, Islam encourages the schools and considers them as a rehabilitation or correction centers for their children. With the number of women or wives every Muslim is allowed to have, you can really reason that, of course, then there's a high increase in the level of children aged from 5 to 14 who are out of school. So most of the times, they are sent to these centers to receive some level of education, which unfortunately, those behind it turn it out to be something else. So it is actually widely spread during the term of Jonathan. We had most of those schools being installed. But of course, with the insurgency in the north of Nigeria, in the west and the east of Nigeria, some of those schools are not functional.
Well, in other news, Morocco's king's pardoned a journalist who'd been sentenced to a year in prison after she was convicted of having allegedly had an abortion. 28-year-old Haja Raisuni's always denied those charges. The case was widely criticised by rights activists. The sentences handed down to her fiancé, gynecologist, anaesthetist, and a medical assistant were also overturned on Wednesday. Erin Ogunke tells us more.
Her arrest and subsequent trial had turned her into a symbol, both of perceived barriers to freedom of speech and women's rights in Morocco. In late September, a court in Rabat sentenced journalist Hajar Raisuni to 1 year in prison, finding her guilty of carrying out an illegal abortion and having premarital sex. Her fiancé was handed the same sentence, while her gynecologist was given 2 years. Raisuni's lawyers called the verdict incomprehensible.
A woman showed up to him bleeding. Should he have let her die? Impossible. Either way, the evidence shows there was no pregnancy, only bleeding.
Paper known for criticizing the government. The case had sparked outrage in Morocco, triggering protests like this one, held on the opening day of her trial on September 9th. But it has also whipped up reactions further afield. Earlier this month, hundreds of Moroccans signed an opinion piece that was published in a Moroccan newspaper and France's Le Monde. The column was named after Article 490 of the Moroccan Penal Code, the section that punishes sex outside of wedlock. In it, they declared themselves outlaws by also claiming to have broken the country's laws. In the piece, the activists demanded legal changes in Morocco, including the legalization of sex outside of marriage and abortion, which is currently only permitted if a woman's life is at risk.
Well, fresh rioting broke out in Conakry on Wednesday, just days after fatal clashes in the city left at least 7 dead. The unrest first broke out during opposition protests against plans for constitutional reform. Critics say that the changes aim to pave the way for President Alpha Condé to run for a third term. Nicolas Chemin has more.
Police were deployed in front of the courthouse, but after a few hours the trial was suspended until Friday. The 8 opposition leaders said they had been badly treated while in custody. They are accused of organising protests. All of them are worried that Alpha Condé might change the constitution to try and run for a third term next year.
It's inconceivable that in Guinea in 2019, men wearing balaclavas go to the homes of honest citizens and arrest them under the pretext that they are threatening public safety. It's appalling. We will tell the judges that these activists, all they are doing is simply respecting the 2010 constitution.
Several people were killed this week in Guinea during clashes between protesters and security forces. The government said it was considering changing the constitution. The opposition believes that means it wants to scrap the 2-term limit at Condé's request. Ministers called for calm.
Our priority is dialogue. That is the best way to find a solution to our disagreements. Because at the end of the day, we are all Guineans. Guinea is our common country.
Alpha Condé is 81 years old. He was first elected president in 2010. Before that, he'd spent decades in the opposition and in exile, and more than 2 years in prison for his ideas. Some believed that with this track record, he would not be tempted by a third term. But Guinea's opposition is increasingly sceptical.
Well, Kenya's officially launched a $1.5 billion Chinese-built railway line. That was on Wednesday. It connects Nairobi to Naivasha and is actually an extension of a line that already links Mombasa to the capital. Efforts to upgrade the country's railways has been strongly supported by President Uhuru Kenyatta. The most recent extension, though, has been criticised for costing too much. It's been nicknamed by some the railway to nowhere because the terminus is in an out-of-the-way town in the Rift Valley. And Uber's taken to the waters of Lagos. The ride-hailing app is hoping to help tackle the Nigerian city's notorious traffic jams by including an option to get picked up by boat. The company started a pilot service in the city and it's already making waves. Take a look.
Commuters in Lagos spend on average 30 hours a week stuck in traffic. One way of alleviating the problem could be for residents to use boats. That's what the company Uber hopes. It has launched a pilot test of a boat service. It takes this Nigerian 3 hours to get to his house by car, but only 30 minutes by boat.
This is a great improvement. You know when to leave work, you know when to leave your home, you know when to get to this to the ferry jetty to get your boat. And really, Uber has really set the pace for even every other competitors out there.
An estimated 22 million people live in Lagos. That's more than double the population of London or New York. But not all of them are sure this service will take off.
Most people will be like, Omi, I'm not going to enter the water because, number one, your jackets are not even correct. If there is a mishap, most times all the mishaps have always ended up very fatally. And that's because most of them, if you actually investigate, the jackets were not even correct in the first place. So most people get drowned. So most people are scared of the waterways.
The company will work in partnership with the Lagos State Waterways Authority. But boats will not suffice. The Nigerian government is going to have to find many alternative solutions to road transport. Indeed, the United Nations predicts that Nigeria's population will more than double to 400 million by 2050. That would make it the third most populous country in the world after China and India.
And finally, Liberia's come out top in the world in terms of offering kindness to strangers. Now, that's the result after it was one of the criteria that's looked at every year as the World Giving Index ranks the most generous nations. Charitable donations and time spent volunteering are also taken into account. Overall, Kenya's come out as Africa's most generous country, ranking 11th internationally. That's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.
Here at France 24, we're taking a broad outlook by talking about the women who are reshaping our world.
En France 24 en español no tenemos temas vedados. y eso se puede ver en televisión y en todas las plataformas que tenemos en Internet.
في فرانس 24 لا ننسى ونحجز لكم أسبوعيا تذكرة عودة للمدن والمناطق التي كانت في قلب الأحداث قبل أن تدخل في طي النسيان.
Claro que tiene algo especial. Somos todos de distintos países y trabajamos con todo el corazón para entregar información en el momento preciso.
أخبار سياسية واقتصادية وثقافية وأيضا رياضية بأعين خبراء رياضيين. هذه هي قناة فرانس 24.
Liberté, égalité, actualité. Bolivian President Evo Morales is running for his 4th consecutive term. As an Aymara Indian, he is proud of his people's customs, so different from the formalities of the presidency.
It's our president's government who have allowed indigenous women to wear the pollera and not be forced to abandon it in order to gain access to a public job.
President Evo Morales knows our suffering. Can you see how much Bolivia has changed?
A demigod for some, a tyrant for others. But to oppose his government is to risk brutal repression.
We mobilized in the street, and unfortunately, one of our classmates died. He was shot dead.
Reporters explores the contradictions of a Bolivia transformed.